Welcome, everyone. My name is Mandy George, and I am an environmental advisor with the Global Shelter Cluster. Really nice to have you all with us today. So this webinar today is being brought to you from three communities of practice of the Global Shelter Cluster, the environment, the recovery, and the technical community of practice, which has a sub group on greener shelter as well, so very relevant for the conversation today. And thank you to the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC. Big thank you to them for their support of the Global Shelter Cluster's environmental work. So the webinar today is building on a learning event that we held in partnership with CARE. Well, it was driven by CARE, actually, in partnership with the Global Shelter Cluster, better said, called Sheltering in the Climate Crisis. And this is a follow-on from that and is the first in a series of 3 webinars happening over the next weeks. So the second will be held in French next week, and the third in Spanish on the 18th of November. So we'll provide a few more details on those at the end of the webinar today. So for today, we want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. We'll have some breakout group discussions later where you can speak and share ideas, not just listen to us. We really encourage you also to be open, not just sharing about what works, but also what's hard and what's challenging when trying to adapt to climate change and deliver life-saving assistance at the same time. So yes, please share with us your thoughts, your hurdles, trade-offs, opportunities, as we grapple with the challenges that from the climatic side, but also that we see in our sector as a whole today. So just to run through what we'll be doing today. So we're going to hear a bit from CARE about their minimum requirements for climate smart shelter. We have some really interesting case studies presented from 3 different contexts, and I'll introduce the speakers a little bit later during that section. We'll have some breakout discussions, and we will have a very quick reporting back from there and sharing some next steps, resources, and upcoming events and other things of interest at the end. At any point, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, which other Global Shelter Cluster and CARE colleagues are monitoring, or raise your hand and jump in with questions. So thank you very much to the colleagues who are in the background supporting with all of that. Okay, so just to kick us off and frame where we are now. So climate and environment has, of course, been a very long-standing priority of the Global Shelter Cluster, embedded in our current strategy, which you can see here. Also a big priority across the sector, as well with the Climate and Environment Charter, increasing donor requirements, etc. We have our environment community of practice, also a heat and extreme heat working group recently started up, and this shelter, greener shelter sub community of practice of the technical community of practice as well. So a big priority. The event that I mentioned earlier in January that was kickstarted by CARE with the support of the Global Shelter Cluster decided to focus on climate change adaptation specifically as an area that has been less explored than, for example, climate change mitigation.
I'll just send you an email for the payment for volunteers and for...
If colleagues who are not speaking could please mute their microphones, that would be great. Thank you. So yeah, the focus was on climate change adaptation because it was felt that this has been a much less explored area than, for example, kind of the greening of the response, reducing our environmental impact more broadly, and climate change mitigation, etc. So this event brought together, I think it was over 150 shelter and settlement practitioners to get into the nitty-gritty of the topic. You can read about it in the report that's up here, and I'm sure someone will pop a link in the chat as well. And there's also a list of resources that came out of that webinar. So these webinars are building on this learning event to continue the dialogue and the learning, and this time kind of broadening out what we're talking about to climate smart rather than just climate change adaptation, but we will get to that definition shortly. But a lot has happened in our sector since January, which I just wanted to mention quickly. before we move on. So you've probably all heard of the humanitarian reset, which essentially is aimed at reforming the international humanitarian aid system to be more effective and efficient, which means doing a lot under the plan that you see up here, which I won't go into in detail. But the relevant point for us today is that at the global level, it means simplifying the existing cluster system from 11 to 8 clusters, which is a sort of a merger of two different, to form two different new clusters, one which is logistics and emergency telecoms, and the other which concerns us, which has been being mysteriously called Cluster X until it has a better name. The name is under discussion, which is going to comprise of shelter and settlements and CCCM, HLP as well, and have a strong climate, environment, and energy focus. So you can see the proposed structure up here. Essentially, this cluster is about the place where people live, which will be reflected in the name when it's decided on. Who will lead the cluster is also being worked out at the moment. So we don't need to go into this in more detail for the time being, but I just wanted to highlight the prominent role that climate, environment, and energy will have in this cluster, given the importance of environment for safe and sustainable settlements. And the fact that environmental risks are created by settlement activities, so we need to take responsibility for managing those, and also because of the operational footprint of shelter, settlement, and site planning being so substantial and unique. So for all of those reasons and many more, climate, environment, and energy will be a core priority for this cluster. So that's where we are now. Felt important just to frame that in terms of what's been going on in the sector. So, and now to the subject that we are here to discuss today. So we have a quick Teams poll for you here, which you will see pop up on your screen. Please tick as many as you think apply. So the question is, which of the following can be considered climate smart? So please tick as many as you think apply, and we'll just give people a couple of minutes to answer. Seeing the results coming in. Interesting. There's a bottleneck. Please keep responding to the poll.
Can you see the number of responses, Mandy? I can see that we've got 36 responses. I'm not sure what you're seeing on your screen, but I hope everyone can see everyone's responses with the percentages coming up on the side.
I actually, for some reason, Sue, can't see the final level of response. So if you could perhaps just tell me.
Shall I read you out? Yeah, so we've got very even.
Yeah.
We've got 32% are saying the adding climate change mitigation actions, 34% using climate information, and 35% including climate adaptive features. So they're quite even on 41 responses I'm seeing.
Okay, fantastic. Well, quite even in some ways is correct. The truth is there are no wrong answers here, and in order to explain that, I will just carry on to the next slide on defining climate smart. So you can see the definition here, which comes from the IFRC Climate Smart Programming and Operations Guide. So the definition used in this guide is using climate information across timescales in designing, adjusting, and implementing programs and operations. Importantly, the reason for this is to ensure that they do not place people at increased risk and anticipate in the future likely climate extremes and growing vulnerabilities. So this definitely has a strong slant towards climate change adaptation, but is not only talking about adaptation. So this, in the terms of shelter and settlements, means making taking climate change into account, both current risks people face and how those risks are likely to change in the future. So being climate risk aware. So the focus on adaptation is really around helping communities and programs to stay safe, durable, effective under a changing climate. So using weather information to guide our choices, for example, how and where we build, what materials we use, etc. At the same time, Climate Smart doesn't just focus on adaptation, it also encourages us to look for ways that our work can reduce environmental impact, which is about our carbon footprint, but it's broader than that. And that includes supporting climate change mitigation. So whether we're using low carbon, locally sourced materials, designing energy efficient shelters, protecting and restoring natural systems, reducing waste and emissions are some examples. So the way I like to say it is climate smart shelter means adapting to climate risks while minimizing our own contribution to the problem. So adaptation led, but also mitigation aware to help people stay safe. So CARE has been doing some thinking and acting on this topic, following on from the previous learning event and the recommendations that came out of that. So I'd like to hand over to James from CARE's shelter team, who's going to talk to us a little bit about their new minimum requirements for climate smart shelter programming. So James, over to you.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, so following on from the learning event, but also in response to a growing demand from CARE country offices to develop climate-related shelter projects, our technical team began working on guidance to support climate smart shelter programming. So this came from a very practical perspective of how to support country offices who may be developing more or less traditional shelter projects, but then want to adapt them to become truly, quote unquote, climate smart. So the key to our thinking centers around this idea that developing climate smart shelter should be a process first, with the end product or products emerging as a result of that process. Now, this is because we wanted to shift the emphasis away from climate-related shelter projects being defined merely by tokenistic, like green or climate features that are kind of added at the end. But instead, we wanted to act to standardized critical process ingredients that are often overlooked, that should be integral to arriving at any final product, such as incorporating climate risk information from resources such as the pictured Red Cross climate risk profiles, from which we can extract really very relevant climate projections and messages for humanitarian actors and affected communities who are in the process of decision making, but also platforming community knowledge of climate change, the experience of communities, the adaptations they may have already been putting into action, and making sure we're listening to those, incorporating them into our programming. Next slide, please. So these are the first minimum requirements we developed within CARE. They are by no means definitive. We want to develop them, add to them, work with others, evolve them. But these points are elaborated in the but these points are all elaborated in the accompanying minimum requirements document in much more detail. But to briefly touch on each point. So point one, all risks assessed. So this is the idea that climate smart is not something that should happen at the midpoint or the end of the project. It should not be tacked on. Any climate smart shelter program should begin with a holistic risk assessment that looks at all relevant risks, even non-climate related risks, including climate risk management. And if this is done properly, it should also influence all sectors and we shouldn't limit it only to shelter. Point two, on focusing on adaptation. I think Mandy touched on this point, but yeah, we should focus our process on climate change adaptation, which is to say adapting the shelter and making it more resilient, adapting shelter programs and making communities more resilient to the changing climate. And this is the climate area where we can also have the most impact for households and communities directly, strengthening their resilience for the future. And importantly, this objective should not be mixed up or confused with other areas which can complement, but other areas such as climate mitigation or greening. So point three, climate risk informed. As I said before, we need to bring climate science to bear. This is really strong in the IFRC definition of climate smart. We need to bring climate science to bear in the process that develops shelter activities. But just as equally, we need to engage communities in discussions on this topic and platform them to contribute their views, opinions, and perspectives on climate change adaptation. Point four, speaks to the community-led, speaks to the idea that climate smart, as much as possible, has to be community-led. There is a real risk as we proceed with all these, climate-related programs, that decisions can be taken with the best of intentions, but by engineers and outsiders in a very top-down process. So for climate smart shelter to be meaningful and sustainable, it has to engage, involve, and be owned by the community. And the final point on environmental sustainability is something of a do no harm principle, asking us to ensure that any climate smart program also considers the local environment, minimizing environmental damage, enhancing wherever possible environmental protection. Next slide, please. So as I said, we put out this first version of CARE's minimum standards, but we really do want to work with the cluster and other organizations to begin to build more of a common understanding as a community of practice on what we mean by climate smart in the context of shelter. Next slide, please. So our next steps are to work with others through the cluster to develop this common understanding on climate smart, but also to build out and complement the minimum standards with an accompanying guidance document we have been referring to internally as the menu of options. So the idea would be to bring together a catalogue of example shelter design elements, settlement level and household level shelter activities that can result from a climate smart process. And we'd love to work with others on this. So anyone interested, please do get in touch with Mandy and ourselves. But yes, this way we can still inspire implementers with the range of what is possible without suggesting a one-size-fits-all approach and keeping the emphasis on contextual climate smart processes. So the message I want to leave you with is, as we continue to work and expand in this area, let's make sure as a sector to develop our shelter projects around a common understanding of what we mean by climate smart, and also focus on developing the process first and allowing the shelter products to emerge as a result of that community-led, climate risk-informed process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Couldn't agree with you more on the process-led side of things, and great to see how this has developed. Can colleagues who are monitoring the chat just let me know if there are any questions in there for James or for anybody else so far?
Not immediately, Mandy, but we'll certainly keep an eye on it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll provide the details of James and Sue later on, or now in the chat, whenever at some point, so that if anyone would like to get in touch with CARE on those minimum requirements, they can. Right, so to bring some of those points to life, we now have three speakers who are going to share some examples of initiatives that they've been working on with us. Each will speak to a climate risk or environmental issue that they were addressing, a specific innovation that was tried to make the shelter more climate smart and environmentally sustainable, the trade-off or challenge faced, and some key lessons. And then after this, we'll go into breakout groups to continue the discussion with the speakers and with the other participants. So if you have any questions for the speakers, please pop them into the chat as we go along, and we can ask the speakers to answer them after the presentations. So to start us off, I'd like to introduce Yodit Gutema, who is the Ethiopia Shelter and NFI Cluster Coordinator from IOM, who's going to be speaking to us about locally adapted shelter kits for climate resilience in Ethiopia. Over to you, Yodit.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Yodit, Shelter NFI Cluster Coordinator for Ethiopia. If you go to the next slide, please. So, still, I mean, my connection is not that good. Maybe I will switch off. I'm in the field connected by hotspot. Maybe it's the camera.
I'm still seeing, I'm still seeing the locally adapted shelter kits slide.
Okay, let me try and switch it again. Sometimes when you share the screen, it's a little bit slow. How's that?
Okay, so still the same, but I can start now. Okay.
Go to the next one, Mandy, if you can. I think you skipped. I think you want the one with the map on it.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's what I have on my screen, but I think it's unfortunately just
kind of
being a bit
halfway
slow.
between
Okay.
two at the minute for me.
Let me try again, switching
Okay.
I
back
sort of
and
seem to have a
forth.
merge of, yeah, that's the one with the first pictures, and then
How's that?
hasn't
It's
come
the
through
same.
yet as the one with the map on it.
I can
For a
start,
while.
or do you want me to start?
Yes, please go ahead, Yodit. I'm sorry about the technical issues. I can see it fine on my screen, but if you wouldn't mind starting, and I can then try and pass through the slides when you need it switched.
Okay, so in Ethiopia, Afar is located in the northern part of the country. A region it's known for its harsh climate conditions, which is also characterized by extreme heat, strong wind, and it also faces a recurring flood and also drought. So the region is also home to mostly for the pastoralist community who lives depend on livestock and mobility. So these conditions also have influenced people, how they adapt, how they construct their shelter, how they move around with their shelter. So usually they use camels for when they move. Okay, so I will just go directly to the second slide. So in 2021, as most of you know, there was a conflict in Ethiopia and in Tigray, which is then later on spilled to Afar and Amhara regions. So during that time, around 300,000 people were displaced across several zones. And at the same time, as the same year, and also in 2022, both displacement and return took place. And as a shelter in FI cluster, we responded to both return and displacement to the with the standard SNFI kit, standard shelter response. For the returnee, we usually provide CGI sheet and so on. For the IDP, we also provide either construct emergency shelters through tarpaulins, ropes, and so on. However, later on, when the cluster went for cluster lead monitoring, and when we also looked at the post-distribution monitoring, the shelter which we constructed are not used. People prefer stay under the tree, or even the CGI are not used. People provide, some of them they have sold it, some of them they are just left it where it was distributed. So afterwards, we activated the technical working group, and the technical working group and the clusters, they traveled to the field, visited the shelters, and also have a discussion with the community. And the strong recommendation is that to use the locally available materials. So using that, so first we develop the return kit. We call it the return package, which is also include HLP, technical support, and so on. And we start implementing those shelters. So and then we continue collecting feedback, information through PDM. Also, we per year, at least before the research, we usually visit 2-3 times or 4 times per year our cluster partners activity. So 2023 and also 2024 brought another conflict and displacement, and also large number of people are displaced because of the climate issues, particularly flood. So again, we provided the plastic sheet. We didn't at that time. We only changed the return kits. Then when we also checked with the community, they said that even for the emergency on when they are in displacement, they also prefer the local materials. So then we revised the emergency shelter kit for the IDPs again, and at the same time, so we also found out that one kit doesn't fit for across the region, because some of the zones are wet, they have flooding and also rain, as other zones are also very dry. So we try to adopt those responses. If you go to the next slide. So on the operational consideration, we recommend the self-build, or we recommend the shelter to be constructed by the beneficiaries. The kit is in kind plus cash. The cash component will be the cash component will cover the local material and other support. However, I mean, in parallel, I wanted to mention that we also, when we implement shelter activity across the country, we noticed, or we observed that one shelter solution doesn't fit to everyone. So particularly for the disabled and for the elderly. So applying this same methodology in Afar, we recommended, or we asked our partners, at least 50% of the shelters should be constructed by the partners. And those shelters should be used as a prototype and also to train the beneficiary. So using that approach, even though Afar, the land is large and the population is widely spread out, so to ensure that at least those living in the same area have one or two shelters that will be constructed by the partners themselves, while they train those that will construct on the best practice or to build back better. On also to get back to on the geographical and climatic side, the construction material for the local construction material are made of locally grown grasses, which grow seasonally. And also one of our challenges was also that this local material is available in specific locations. So we also include in our revision process for the partners to do consideration while they do the planning process. Another challenge or another area which we asked our partners to do consideration is that the geographical location, as I mentioned before, there is also the wet and the drier areas, but at the same time also those bordering the bordering waradas of Afar with Tigray, they prefer the CGI and so on. So we have to adjust the response plan to fit the situation. In terms of protection aspect, later on, we also found out that in Afar, women are the ones that traditionally construct the shelters. So ensuring that the materials, the cash is also provided to them. And also they are part of the training when the partner provides the constructs the shelter. Was also one of the emphases we made when we revised the response. Another area is also in terms of protection is the conflict sensitivity, because there are intercommunal conflict at the same time. Also, we also don't want the IDP or the returnee to have a better shelter than the host community. So our recommendation is for the partner at least to include 50% previously. Probably now with reset, it may be less to target the most vulnerable from the host community. So this is some of the consideration we make both from the operation side, also from program implementation side. Next, please. I will go to the challenge. Yes, there is a challenge. Yes. So as I mentioned before, also the seasonal availability of the material was one of the challenge, but when partners later applied for funding or also on the guideline, we encourage them to align their work plan with the seasonality, and at the same time also instead of procuring our previous recommendation was that to procure from cooperative, but later we found out that it's better if the cash is given to the beneficiaries themselves, so that they can buy the items with cheaper price and also not influencing the market. It's also Afar is also infrastructure in Afar is also is not that good. So transporting items, particularly during the rainy season and the flood season, was one of the challenges. So this also we encourage them also to align their work plan with this seasonality. Yeah, I mean, the main and other challenge is also the resource constraints. We reached very few of our targets because of the resource, and also I mean this type, the local materials type of the response is a bit expensive than the emergency shelter type, but we try to convince our donors in the long run this is a better option than the usual tarpaulins and also CGI response option. If you go to the next slide, please. I mean, advantage is also it's traditional. It's also can be transported easily. So it also reduces the plastic use. For instance, the options for the drier areas, it's 100% local material. For the wet area, it's reduced by 33%. It also boosts the local economy because we are not partners. Our partners are not importing plastic sheet or CGI. But on the limitation is, as mentioned before, the seasonal scarcity and also the availability of the material. So the risk of also overusing the depletion of the natural resources is also one of our concerns. But considering that we only reached 20% of our target, that's also something which we didn't happen yet, but we also put into consideration, because I mean I also wanted to mention in here that we did evaluate our shelter and fire response into the environment study, and we find that particularly with the tarpaulin and other industrial material, the impact is huge. So we wanted to ensure that is reduced as much as possible. Next, please. I think this is the last one, or I hope.
Yes, the next one is the last one.
Okay. Yes, I mean for the recommendation, we are trying to also build on this. For instance, on one of the region, which is Benishangul, that use the bamboo. So we are looking into using the bamboos instead of the CGI and so on, if it's accepted by the community. It's also, I mean, we are every year, once or twice, even sometimes once or twice, we also revise the guideline depending on the information we collected from PDMs and also from our partners. So it's also scale with caution. As I mentioned before, we don't want to also overuse the natural resources and also the market at the same time. And also build on environmental assessment with the support from the Global Shelter Cluster. We are about to finalize the environmental profile. We also, again, with support from the Global Cluster, we also did a study on landslides and so on. So using all those information, we are planning to improve our responses. Thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you so much, Yodit. It's a really interesting case study and interesting to hear those kind of trade-offs of local versus imported materials, pressure on natural resources, and how that was managed, and also the cost side of things. We have a case study on this this initiative that will be published as part of a compendium of green shelter interventions and innovations that we'll be able to share with you all as a follow-up from this webinar. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next presenter, but please keep putting your questions into the chat and then we can come back to some of them at the end. And Yodit potentially could answer some of them in the chat as well if there's time, if she's able to. So thank you so much, Yodit, and we'll now move on to hear from our next speaker, Varnai, who works for the NGO Geres. She's the project manager, climate resilient housing and economic development. And she's going to be speaking to us about passive solar housing in Afghanistan. So Bea, over to you.
Thank you, Mandy. So yes, at Geres, we are an international development organization. We work on just energy transition and climate solidarity. And I'll speak to you about the passive solar verandas in Afghanistan that we implemented between 2003 and 2021. So I guess you're moving the slides, but we may not see them yet, but I'll go on anyway so that we can keep the timing. So as you know, for Afghanistan, so there's quite harsh weather conditions in terms of harsh winters, harsh summers as well, which leads to many, the population using unsustainable heating practices that lead to a lot of different issues, of course, such as deforestation, indoor-outdoor pollution, and health risks that are linked to that. But there's also a big asset, which is there's many hours of sunlight basically in Afghanistan, and the idea or the design innovation that we implemented, you can go to the next slide, are the passive solar verandas, or what they're called the sun houses, basically. So the idea is to improve the conditions, the living conditions for the households through quite a simple principle in terms of adding a solar veranda to the house, so like sort of an outbuilding that uses or harnesses the sunlight and sun radiation during the day, that heats up the walls and the environment during the day, and then releases heat during the night. So it's quite a simple principle based on simple material that is mostly available locally. And the result of that is reducing the need for fuel and the fuel consumption of the households, the avoidance of CO2 that is linked to that, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, improving the indoor comfort conditions, mostly reducing smoke that is linked to heating and generally the well-being of the households. And another plus is maybe, as you can see in the pictures, that there's also an additional sort of living space for the families, for the households that can be used. You can go to the next slide. So James mentioned earlier the importance of process-based working. So this was very much based on an iterative design process for these outbuildings or solar verandas. There's not like one set specific sort of design or a single design, but there's a wide array of options available. Craftsmen were trained to implement these solar verandas. Also, households were learning how to use them. So there's a lot of like sort of training around awareness raising around behavior change as well, but also like sort of around the physics and the functioning of these solar verandas. And I think you can go to the next slide. So some of the challenges, of course, is in the delivery model or generally in the dissemination of such a solution is, of course, around the financial capacities of the households. That will always be sort of determining the scale and the size of the dissemination. Another issue that we came across and that is important to address is around the life cycle of the materials that are being used. As you can see, these are plastic sheets. They're not necessarily, the households are not necessarily able to recycle them or to source them locally. at least if we're speaking of high quality UV resistant plastic sheeting that needed to be imported. So this is a big life cycle, material life cycle issue there that we encountered. And we've seen that these solar verandas have been self-disseminated, self-replicated by many households. So beyond the actual project and program and the support that was provided through the project. So that is very interesting. But of course, in that self-dissemination, it's very important that people still understand sort of the technical requirements, such as orientation, of course, or the use of different types of materials that are resistant and so on. So that's always going to be a challenge in terms of ensuring that this is taken account of in the self-replication. Yeah, and you can, I guess, go to the last slide for this presentation. Just put up a few numbers for you that you can have an idea of the spread of these solar verandas. And I guess if I wanted to leave a few sort of key lessons from this experience, it's around this iterative process of design and the fact that it's really important to not, of course, only propose like or sort of suggest technical solutions, but also everything related to training, awareness raising, behavior change campaigns. So all of that sort of goes together to really propose effective solutions at scale. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mandy, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Bea. Really interesting case study, and I really liked how there's so many multiple benefits from this solution as well, from not only environmental but also health and social, etc. So really interesting. I think we will move to our next and final case study presentation and then take some questions after that. Oh, just to mention before we move on, actually, this is also one of the case studies in the compendium that we'll be able to share with you after the webinar. So I think we're jumping to Bangladesh now. If I could introduce Farooq Rahman, who is from CARE Bangladesh, WASH Senior Program Manager, who is going to be talking to us about shelter prototype development, factoring in women's voices to address the local climate risk context in Cox's Bazar. So Farooq, over to you.
Thank you, Mandy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the world's largest refugee settlement, which is situated in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, hosting around 1.15 million of Rohingya population. So this settlement from the beginning is situated in a coastal area and exposed to different hazard every year. And on top of that, recent climate change impact has made the life of the Rohingya people very miserable because we often experience now that there is excessive heat during the summer, and this has two big impact in this settlement. One is we are facing lots of people with scabies and other skin diseases because of extreme heat inside their tarpaulin made shelter. And also this settlement is very exposed to the fire incident, so excessive heating is always very risky. To if there is any ignition, the fire incident risk is very high because of the heat. Also because of recent climate changes, the groundwater level is going down every year. I mean, maybe not yet, but in coming years we will have to experience drought where drinking and water for day-to-day uses will be very difficult to arrange. So drawing the CARE's long experience in this settlement, we now I come to the shelter. So this was the general information. So with our experience, we experience that often the voice of the women are not here when we are implementing some services, and when it is shelter, they are left behind completely. But what we see in Rohingya culture, that the women are the one who usually stays at the home for a long time, because according to their culture, the Rohingya women do not usually work outside. So what with in collaboration with CARE's global shelter team, we plan to do an assessment or a research to identify what are the current climate risks we have in this settlement, and how the women feels about their shelter, and how do they want to fight those hazards and climate changes and make themselves more resilient. So that is it. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yes, excuse the delay for the slides are a little bit slow in passing, but please go ahead.
No worries. So this research was based on, reaching out to the different aged women, starting from the children from learning center, then adolescents, girls, and then women from different camp. We have conducted this research and data collection in 7 different camps, and we have identified some solid recommendation from the women, which we have accommodated in our shelter prototype design. Moving to the next slide. So what we have identified, it's very interesting. Let's say among our respondents, more than 60% of households express that they have experienced one or more hazard, and those hazard is very serious. We often experience the life-threatening hazards. Let's say, as we were mentioning, that because of climate change, we experience excessive heat during the summer. At the same time, we also experience excessive rainfall during the monsoon season, which cause flash floods and landslides. Even last year, we experienced more than 15 death cases because of massive landslides. So this was the hazard that the people of this Cox's Bazar settlement was exposed. Coming back to what recommendation we received from the women's, girls and the women, so that their shelter is more resilient to the climate changes or heating and hazards. So the women were recommending us that we can use concrete footing in their shelter, so that the shelter stays strong during heavy wind or heavy monsoon or cyclone seasons. And also, one most important thing that that came out is current shelter doesn't have a very good ventilation system, because the camp settlement, this settlement is very densely populated, and there is one after another shelters, and that too very small. So most of the time, the ventilation focus on ventilation was not appropriate. So that is one thing that the community, the girls and women are pushing us, that so that we can design and improve shelter that have a proper ventilation, so that it reduce heats, and even this has lots of advantages. Also, using durable materials is a requirement for everyone. What we usually see, that because of lots of hazards and climate changes, every year we need to change or upgrade their shelters. But if they recommend that if we use durable materials, then that could be easy for them. Can we move forward with the slides, please?
Yes, apologies. I don't know why they don't seem to be changing very quickly at all on the presentation. I can, yes, it'll just take a second. It'll be up in a second. If you could just continue, that would be great. Sorry.
So this was something that I wanted to visualize, actually. So Let me explain a bit. We have prepared a new shelter design, adapting something from existing design, and also incorporating almost all the recommendation we received from the girls and women, from 7 different camps. So in this shelter, the ventilation was a key focus, where we as we mentioned, that heating was a concern. So with proper ventilation, we believe that the heating inside the shelter will be reduced. And it's still not moving. So I have a very important slide that I wanted to display to everyone. So yeah, this is it. Stay with this. So we have 6 major changes that we made in our current shelter. One is solar. There was there was limited solar scope previously, but we will adopting the solar and proper lighting, so that the girls and women feel safe. And then we have incorporated maybe some of us know that the Rohingya community in this settlement, the cooking facility is inside the shelter, so that all itself has a big hazard of smoke getting inhaled by the women who are cooking. So keeping in the mind that we have designated inside the shelter one space for the cooking, and right beside the cooking facility we kept a very nice window, so that the smokes, most of the smokes actually go outside the shelter, so that the women don't have to inhale most of the smokes. And then of course, as I told you, improve ventilation. So ventilation was kept in all 4 sides of the shelter. Additionally, we have 2 windows in this shelter. And then where the girls and the adolescents, girls we met in different camps, also recommended that if back to their Myanmar shelter, they used to do gardening and things around their shelter. So they expressed that if we can keep something, at least something around this shelter also, so that they can practice gardening and their shelter looks good. So that is that option is also kept inbuilt with the shelter design. And then security was a big concern, because current shelter doesn't is made out of tarpaulin and bamboos, and the door and window is not properly durable and secure. So we have prepared a very secure door in our design. And then another important recommendation from the women group was, though the shelter is very small, actually it is 10 into 15 feet for a 5 to 6 members family. So it's very small. So still, if we use the shelter, the interior design, the interior in a way, they can keep their all the belongings properly. So inside the shelter, we have kept lots of shelves. In our design, we also mark that, which will help them storing their belongings. So these are the major changes that we have made. So this is, I believe this is a very important changes and a new design. I would rather want to say that this is a design made by the community, not us. We just accumulated all their recommendation into one design. So the credit for the design goes to them. And when we design this shelter, the minimum requirement, most of the minimum requirement was addressed. For example, we assess all the risks at the beginning, and this is focused on adaptation. Most importantly, this is absolutely community led. So if we can go to the last slide, we have learned very good lessons. Number one, the women are very interested to get involved in shelter activities. They want to get trained. They even want to work in shelter repair and construction. And then there are, there are, let's say this is very good scope for them. And also, if we can use these durable materials in designing the shelter, then the cost of repair and maintenance every year will be reduced. So that is a big advantage. And then this has a very good scope to display the voice of the women and girls, and ensure their leadership in the designing or future activities of the shelter. Mentioning few challenges that camp is this settlement is very overpopulated, and if you move in a camp, you can't find, literally you can't find a very empty space. So that would be a challenge when we will be implementing this. And also the government regulation is still a challenge, because the government is not yet allowing the organization to use very durable materials. So that is one thing. So what we are doing currently, we have prepared an advocacy poster, which will be circulated widely, and then we are by the second half of this month, we will be designing, actually building a prototype, so that we can start advocating with the government authorities and other partners and sectors, so that we can incorporate this design among different agencies. And that is what we are doing. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening. Over to you, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Farouk. Really great to see the minimum requirements in action. I wonder, Sue or other colleagues monitoring the chat, are there any questions that haven't been addressed yet?
Thanks, Mandy. I think some questions are already or have been addressed in the chat already.
Okay.
Whether there were questions particularly for Farouk, I'm not sure, but hopefully Farouk can respond. If we're are we on time to go to the breakout rooms now, or did you want to have some time for a question now?
I think if there aren't any immediate questions that have come up in the chat, why don't we move on to the breakout discussions, where our presenters will be joining us as well. So feel free to continue asking them questions there. So we're going to move over to a mural board now. You'll find the link in the chat. And we would like to build on these examples that we've just heard, to focus specifically to talk on the hardest trade-off you faced in trying to make shelter more climate smart, and how you've worked around and balanced these trade-offs, and then what kind of tools, standards, or support would help to scale climate smart shelter in your context. So a bit of a brainstorm. We have facilitators from both the Global Shelter Cluster and the CARE team. So thank you very much to all of you. We'll just take 20 minutes for the breakout groups to make sure we have enough time to wrap up afterwards. So please contribute as much as you can, pop post-it notes onto the board, and share your experiences. And then we will come back to the main room in about 20 minutes. So
okay, I think we're going back.
Yes, welcome back, everyone. Thank you. I think people should be slowly arriving back. Apologies to the people that got stuck without a breakout room. I do apologize for that. I think most of you found your way to a breakout group in the end. I can see there's been a very active discussion on the mural board, which is fantastic. Just wanted to ask a couple of the facilitators of the groups if they could maybe just share one kind of burning insight that sort of stood out to you from your group. I don't know, maybe Luca, would you like to share something for your group? I see you are full of post-it notes and lots of activity there.
Absolutely. No, thanks. Yeah, great participation. And I think the three main team subject came out from this breakout room. The first one is about the cost and availability of the alternative materials. And is also linked somehow to the donor requirements because the money is coming from there. Another big subject is about the community, the participants' priorities, the willingness, what they wish to receive. And this is about also the chosen material and the need for them some time to juggle for other priorities, such as food, education, etc. And the third big subject theme that comes out from my reading, but of course you are very welcome to go through and again to point out other issues, is about the solution that should respond to the emergency in the first phase of the response, but should also take into account the possibility to increase the resilience so that the solution can withstand the future shock a bit better than just a tarpaulin, for instance. And so, and then how also the tarpaulin is responded to the climate smart issues. So what compromise to prioritize? I will stop there to leave also place to the others while I can keep reading. Thanks.
Thanks, Luca. Yes, lots to juggle there. Maybe Alex, could I ask you maybe just to share what would be kind of the top takeaway from the discussion in your group?
Yeah, the funding is one of the challenge that several people mentioned. Funding for depending because sometimes the donors do not allow some activities. Another point that was interesting, it was about the timing. It's similar to the discussion we had for the first case study. We have one example where partners wanted to use sun-dried bricks, but during the rainy season, it was not possible. So you need to adapt the way you work because when you buy burnt bricks, it's easy. But when you have to produce your own bricks, it's related to the seasons. So yeah, working in a greener shelter requires also adaptation in the way we work. Maybe one of the lessons.
Mm. Yeah, so very true. Thank you. Yeah, so very true. And certainly a lot of those things were reflected in the case studies that we heard as well on the cost implications and seasonal variations, etc. So we wanted to ask you now, after this webinar today and the discussion that you've had, on a quick poll here, what action will you take as a response to today's webinar? So is there, I don't know, it could be anything immediate, from reading more about climate smart programming, changing something in a program you were working on, speaking to someone who's presented today or a technical advisor. Yes, what is something that you have heard today that maybe has sparked some kind of action that you'd like to take? So if you could type your responses in there, we'll get a bit of a word cloud coming up. Seeing climate profiles from IFRC. Yes, lots of interesting stuff to check out there. Country profiles from the Climate Center. We also have environmental country profiles for shelter and settlement response that the Global Shelter Clusters produce for about 15 different countries, including Ethiopia, which Yodit mentioned, which will be available soon. And we also have one for Afghanistan, which was also talked about today, and Bangladesh, actually. So the three countries that we heard about today. So please do check those out on the Global Shelter Cluster website. I'm seeing, looking into links that were shared, some specific things like pastoralist kits, researching different things, exploring different possibilities. Kids from Ethiopia, we'll definitely share that case study with you all as a follow-up to this webinar, where you can read more about it.
And this word cloud, Mandy, the sort of summarizing some keywords, but I think what we'll also be able to do is get the full responses, because I think people are typing perhaps some longer responses, and we'll be able to sort of collect what people have sort of anonymously put into that. And again, we can add that to sort of the summary of the webinar as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for all those thoughts. Just by way of wrapping up, we wanted to share with you here some different information on some upcoming webinars. Mentioned the one a version of this one, but with slightly different presentations, in French next week and on the 21st, and Spanish on the 18th of November. And you'll find some links to those events in the chat. The Recovery Community of Practice also has a webinar upcoming on shelter and health, based on some research that was done recently. So please do also check that out. We will share some key takeaways from this. I think we didn't have time to hear about all of the discussions on the trade-offs, etc., but we'll definitely compile all that information and share it with you. We'll share the case studies we mentioned, the two that we heard about today, as well as the care minimum requirements and more information on the work in Bangladesh too. Please do join our 3 communities of practice. The top QR code there on the screen will take you there, and also the Extreme Heat Working Group. If you're interested in that topic, you have another QR code for that one there. CARE is very interested, as James mentioned earlier, in collaborating on moving forward with the minimum requirements for climate smart shelter, how to get buy-in from across the sector and develop it to the next stage, this menu of options that he mentioned. So please contact James or Sue. Their emails will also be in the chat, so you can get in touch with them directly. Yeah, so lots of further ways to engage. Just some final thoughts. So from the perspective of the Global Shelter Cluster, obviously we are facing some very real challenges in our sector at the moment. But as we move forward into this new cluster, I think it's a huge opportunity to keep environment and climate and energy at the forefront of what we do, to support better outcomes for people affected by crisis. So looking forward to working together on this and continuing these discussions going forward. And yeah, thank you again to SDC for their support of our environmental work, to the Global Shelter Cluster and CARE colleagues for their collaboration organizing this event, and to all of you for your active participation today. There's clearly lots to discuss and lots more to discuss. So hopefully we'll see many of you at the upcoming events. So thank you so much again, and we'll maybe see some of you next week for the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Great stuff. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.